This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 459 of the Late Round Podcast, with many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Think you've got what it takes to be the GOAT? Every football fan dreams of meeting the greatest NFL players of all time, and starting this week, FanDuel and GOAT Fuel have teamed up to make those dreams a reality. In FanDuel's GOAT Gauntlet series, powered by GOAT Fuel, fans will put their fantasy knowledge to the test by competing for a chance to take on the NFL's greatest of all time. Here's how it works. Over the course of the next 3 weeks, there will be 3 qualifier contests highlighting a specific position. The qualifying contests will award $75,000 in cash prizes, GOAT Fuel products, and the seat in the GOAT Gauntlet final to take home the ultimate prize. Those who win the qualifier contest or roster the highest scoring player of that week's highlighted position will be automatically entered into the finals, where they'll have their chance to play against 3 NFL GOATs, Jerry Rice, Emmitt Smith, and Warren Moon. And they'll compete to win their share of $10,000 in cash prizes, GOAT Fuel products, and an exclusive virtual meet and greet with the NFL Hall of Famers. For more details, visit FanDuel.com/GOATFuel or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Trend 1 this week is that Marvin Jones has averaged a 27.3% target share per game over the last 4 weeks. Now, of course, Kenny Golladay hasn't been playing, and Kenny Golladay has influenced Marvin Jones' target share in the past. But Jones is averaging over 17 PPR points per game over this time, and over his last 6 games, that number's roughly the same, just a few tenths of a point lower. As I alluded to on yesterday's 15 transaction show, the Lions look like they're going to open things up a bit down the stretch. So Jones definitely has some appeal, especially if Kenny Golladay continues to sit. Darren Waller scored 45 PPR points on Sunday. He had an insane outing with 200 receiving yards and multiple touchdowns. He's been the second most valuable tight end this year in fantasy football without a doubt. But those 200 yards that he had in week 13, that was actually more than what he'd seen in his 5 games prior combined. Over his 5 previous games, he had 198 receiving yards. For as strong as he's been at times this year, he's definitely not been as consistent as we'd ideally like from the tight end too. But big props to him on a monster game. Cam Akers saw 77.8% of the Rams running back rushes on Sunday. That was his biggest mark of the season by far. His previous high was a 44% share. He turned his big workload into 21 carries, he had 72 yards, and he's now got 2 straight top 20 performances in PPR formats. The problem is that he's still not seeing much love through the air, and that's going to cap his ceiling. It's going to be very, very hard for him to give you RB1 output if he's seeing less than a target per game. But things are at least trending way up for Cam Akers, as long as he can stay healthy. Since week 9, or over the last 5 weeks, Russell Wilson has averaged just a little over 16 fantasy points per game. Over the first 8 weeks of the season, that average was over 29. But since week 9, and yes, this is an arbitrary cutoff, I'm just trying to have some fun here. Since week 9, Russell Wilson is the QB 14 in points per game. You still probably have to start him during the fantasy playoffs, but if you haven't tempered expectations yet, let this trend be a reminder to do so. In games where Diontae Johnson didn't leave early this year, he's averaged a target share per contest of 26%. Over his last 4 games, he's been really consistent in target share. 22%, 24%, 25%, and 23%. Meanwhile, the Steelers have the second highest pass-to-rush ratio in neutral game scripts this year, and they've had the most pass attempts in the league. Now, I'm recording this Tuesday afternoon, so there's a chance the Cowboys pass them, but Pittsburgh's been a super pass-friendly team this year, and Diontae Johnson is seeing a good target share on that team. Even if he's not amazingly efficient per target, even if his average depth of target is low, volume is what's important for fantasy purposes, and volume is earned. If Diontae Johnson was bad, he wouldn't get the ball as much as he does. This is all to say that Johnson is good and he should continue being started in your fantasy lineup. Jonathan Taylor now has back-to-back games where he's ranked as an RB1 in fantasy football. They came in plus matchups against Green Bay and Houston, but it's still good to see. The problem is that his workload from week 11, which was his last game, because remember, he missed week 12 because of COVID. But his workload from that week 11 game saw him with a 68.8% running back rush share to go along with an 11.8% target share. And the thought was, oh man, what if they unleash Jonathan Taylor down the stretch? Well, in week 13, they didn't. His peripherals got worse. He saw a snap share go from 56% to 48%. His running back rush share dropped by about 15 percentage points, and his target share by over 3 percentage points. So while the result was stronger for Taylor, and while it's good to see him be so efficient as a pass catcher, he's still not really capturing the backfield share that we'd ideally want him to capture. One of the biggest touchdown regression candidates at quarterback is Aaron Rodgers, and it's not close. He has an 8.7% touchdown rate. That's pacing to be one of the best touchdown rates of all time. That's a number that tends to regress, even if good quarterbacks generally see good touchdown rates. And then you can see this regression when looking at yards versus touchdowns too. Yards correlate to touchdowns. I talk about this all the time. More yards generally means more touchdowns. Aaron Rodgers this year, based on his yardage total and how quarterbacks have scored touchdowns since 2011, he should have over 15 fewer touchdown passes than he currently has. Now again, this is a good example, but there's a lot more analysis that goes into something like this. It's no different than at running back. If a player is seeing touches in the right areas of the field, then they should expect to see more touchdowns than usual. But even when you account for all of this, Rodgers is still outperforming expectation. According to Pro Football Focus's expected touchdowns model, he should have 8 fewer scores. Now don't get me wrong, you're not moving Rodgers from your lineup. The Packers have a great schedule over the fantasy playoffs, but their pass to rush touchdown ratio this year is 3.6. That's the second highest in the league. We should expect them to lean a little bit more run heavy with their touchdown scoring down the stretch, which should help Aaron Jones. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense has dominated this year in fantasy. We know this. They can get to the quarterback. But since the end of week 2, the best defense in fantasy football has been the Miami Dolphins. Over this time, they've averaged 1.3 interceptions per game, 2.8 sacks per game, and they've scored 3 touchdowns on defense and special teams. On a weekly basis, the Dolphins have finished as a top 8 defense in 7 of their last 10 contests. Now, they've faced a reasonably easy schedule. So has Pittsburgh, though. And without some defensive touchdowns in their tough matchups, this stat wouldn't look as favorable. So no, I'm not playing them against the Chiefs this week. But the Dolphins have been a really cool story this year. Alex Smith took over as Washington's quarterback in week 9. He didn't start that game, but he played a lot, so we'll include that in the sample. Over these 5 games where he's played the majority of the team's snaps, J.D. McKissic has averaged a ridiculous 22.4% target share per game. Now, I know that part of his big game on Monday night against Pittsburgh was related to Antonio Gibson getting hurt and a negative game script. But to be fair, we've only seen Gibson as a primary pass catcher out of the backfield for that offense once. It was against Dallas on Thanksgiving. If Gibson misses time, McKissic is definitely in play in PPR formats. The last trend this week is that in Brandon Aiyuk's last 4 games, he's averaged a target share per game of 28.6%. That's incredibly good. And he's produced too. He's been the wide receiver 19, 6, 13, and 12 over this span. Deebo Samuel has played in half of those games, so definitely take this with a grain of salt. But the man is crushing it. Brandon Aiyuk is crushing it. And he should definitely be on your radar as a starter during the fantasy playoffs. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you tomorrow with the weekly matchup show.